Hey, Wellness Warriors, welcome back to the Wellness Revolution. So, today we're going to have episode number 3, a two-part series on our two-step process that ends burnout and fatigue for good in as little as 3 weeks. And so, in our last episode, episode 2, we talked about step 1 to beat burnout and fatigue. And step 1, I would encourage you to go back and watch that podcast if you haven't watched it, but just for a brief review of what we talked about dynamic metabolic typing. So if you haven't visited our website yet, Awakened Wellness Now, I encourage you to go to our homepage and look at our services. And within our services drop-down menu, you will see our burnout assessment. I encourage you to take that burnout assessment. It walks you through our 5-question assessment that will tell you your dynamic metabolic type. And as we discussed in episode 2, a dynamic metabolic type is essentially a pattern that explains why you're burnt out and how to fix it. And so a dynamic metabolic type, there are 6 types. So as you may remember, we talked about the 2 broad categories of whether your dynamic metabolic type is deficient or excessive. Excessive means there's too much energy, there's too much stuff bogging your metabolism down. So things like inflammation and toxins. That's what we're talking about when we say too much energy, too much stuff. That kind of gunks up the mechanisms of your metabolism, and it makes it really hard for your energy to flow and be properly made. And that's the result. That results in burnout for people with an excess dynamic metabolic type. And then we talked about the subcategories of hot excess, cold excess, and temperature neutral excess based on how you perceive temperature, based on your own tolerance or intolerance of different types of temperatures. And then we talked about the second broad category, which is a deficient dynamic metabolic type. A deficient dynamic metabolic type means that your metabolism isn't functioning properly because things are missing. Things that you need to run metabolism, nutrients, hormones, vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats. Those are the things that run your metabolism. And by metabolism, what I mean is how your body's cells make and use energy to power their function. And so people with a deficient dynamic metabolic type, what that means is stuff's missing and your metabolism can't run properly because of that. And so you're tired and exhausted, literally because you don't have enough energy to power your body's functions. And so again, there are 3 subcategories of the deficient dynamic metabolic type. So you're either a hot deficient, a cold deficient, or a temperature neutral deficient. And again, this is the roadmap and the secret that helps you to figure out step 2, right? So step 2 is essentially applying what you now know as your dynamic metabolic type, the why you're tired and exhausted and burnt out, and the how. So the how is basically doing the opposite of what your dynamic metabolic type actually is. And so I'll show you exactly what I mean. And once you know your dynamic metabolic type, now what you're going to do is apply it to what I call the 4 pillars of wellness. And that's step 2 to beating burnout and fatigue for good. So the 4 pillars of wellness are pillar number 1 is eat, pillar number 2 is move, pillar number 3 is rest, and pillar number 4 is detox. So these are the 4 foundational things that the body requires to be metabolically sound, right? So we need to eat right, we need to move right, we need to sleep right, and we need to detox right. When we have those 4 pillars cranking on all cylinders, we feel vibrant, energetic, we feel happy, joyful, we feel motivated, and things run smoother, right? That's because our metabolism has everything that it needs to power our body function, and so there's nothing left behind, there's nothing missing, there's nothing, in the way, right? So then we don't have burnout. We don't even have really fatigue. We feel really good. So when we're burnt out, what it's implying is that one or more of those four pillars of wellness are not firing on all cylinders, right? So I liken the pillars of wellness to like legs on a table, right? So typically we have four legs on a table. And if one of the legs is a little wobbly or even breaks, the other three legs can usually more or less hold up the table unless there's something out of balance on the table, right? That puts too much pressure on that broken leg. Then the table will fall over and the things that are on that table fall to the floor, right? And certainly if two legs are down and out, then clearly that table is going to collapse, right? And it's the same thing with the pillars of wellness. We need four of them holding everything up, holding our metabolism up so that we have the proper amount of energy, optimal body function so that we stay out of burnout and fatigue. And so probably the most important one is eat, nutrition, right? They're all super important, but when we look at the other three pillars, they actually rely a lot on our nutrition. And so this is the reason that I categorize pillar number one as, the most important one, so to speak. And so when you're looking at a dynamic metabolic type and how to apply it to how to eat, it takes all the mystery out of should I fast or not? Should I go on a raw vegan diet? Should I go on an alkaline diet? Should I go on a keto diet? What should I do? Should I eat raw food? Should I eat cooked food? Takes all the mystery out once you know your dynamic metabolic type. So let's start out with one example, right? So we'll talk about the hot deficient dynamic metabolic type first. So hot deficient implies that number one, when we say hot, what we mean is that individual feels a little bit warmer than other people, right? So don't ever compare yourself to just one other person because you don't know how that person is relative to you, right? So you want to compare yourself to groups of people, like multiple family members, multiple friends, things like that, right? So you kind of get a general consensus. If you tend to be the only one that feels warmer when all your friends don't feel warm or they even feel cold, then that tells you that you are a hot metabolic type, right? Hot dynamic metabolic types also tend to feel a bit thirsty. Their temperature might even run a little bit hot, right? So you might be that person that, you have a temperature of 99 degrees all the time, even when you're not sick, right? Or, that person may have a dry mouth, but they generally feel warmer. So you're the one duking it out, to control the air conditioner in the summer to make it cooler, when your friends or your family don't feel hot. So that's a hot dynamic metabolic type, right? And then now a deficient means that you're hot, you feel warmer than other people, and you're missing things that your metabolism requires to function, that your body requires to function properly. So when someone is a hot, deficient, dynamic metabolic type, another thing that that's implying is that you have too much acidity in your cells, right? So when we say that something is hot in traditional Chinese medicine, the closest thing we can equate to that in our modern language or in our mainstream medical model is to say that we're too acidic. And so acid is hot. Obviously it burns. And so this is what we mean by hot. So we're implying that you have too much acidity in your body due to deficiencies. Things are missing. And so when we apply that information to pillar number one, eat, when someone is depleted, they're missing things. Obviously, it makes sense that you need to replenish those things. You need to add those things back in, right? So when we say that someone is deficient, we're really wanting them to eat actually more often. So small, frequent meals is really highly recommended so that you can replace what's missing. A lot of times people fall into the trap when they feel that they're in a burnout situation, that they need to do a restrictive diet, that they need to perhaps try intermittent fasting and see if they can get themselves out of that rut. But if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, whether you're hot, cold, or temperature neutral, you're actually going to make yourself worse by feeding yourself less. Right. And it's a bit of a myth to say also that, well, I'm still going to eat the same number of calories. I'm just not going to eat during the early part of the day, and I'm going to start eating at around 12 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I'll stop eating at about 8 or 9 p.m. The flaw with that line of thinking is that we're not equipped to digest food late in the day, right? So Chinese medicine teaches us that we're more primed to digest and absorb food earlier in the day. And that makes sense, right? Because we're more active in the middle of the day, right? We're not more active at night for the most part, right? Unless we have, night shift work or something like that. But for the vast majority of us, we're most active during daylight hours, right? And so it makes more sense for us to eat early in the day because we have to digest that food, absorb that food, distribute that food throughout our bodies so that it's available as usable energy to us. So if we're fasting during those critical times, we're actually starving the body of what it needs. So if you're already deficient, if you're already missing what you need for your metabolism to function properly, fasting is actually going to make you feel worse. And so this is why a lot of people don't tolerate intermittent fasting. It's because they already are depleted. So you want to do the opposite. You actually want to eat earlier in the day and small, frequent meals throughout the day. You're not eating more calories, you're just redistributing them to a different part of the day when you're most active. And so what that's going to do is that's going to provide your body with more nutrition, more resources, more vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fats, and water, right? The water content of our food as well. That's going to provide our metabolism with much needed energy when it needs it the most. And so small, frequent meals, and what I mean by that is eating roughly every 3 hours. Now, you don't have to have a full meal every 3 hours, but you'll have your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, and then a couple of snacks in between, right? So that you're eating roughly every 3-ish hours or so throughout the day. With your first meal, preferably very, close to the time when you've woken up. So within like, say, 30, 45 minutes of waking up, you start eating with your breakfast, right? And so this is the eat pillar for anyone who is a deficient dynamic metabolic type. Now, where the hot, cold, and temperature neutral come in is in determining what you're going to eat and how it's prepared. So for someone who's too hot, they have too much acidity in the cells of their bodies. The solution to that is to have food that is more what we call alkaline. So the opposite of acid is alkaline. And foods that are more alkaline are going to be foods that are a little bit more on the bland side, that have more water in them. For example, green leafy vegetables, lettuce, cucumbers, celery, lemons, limes, grapefruits. Things that have a lot of water in them naturally tend to be alkaline. Green tea is also alkaline. Beverages that are kind of bland and boring tend to be more alkaline. What that's going to do is it's going to flush the acidity out or neutralize the acidity so that you don't feel as warm anymore because you don't have as much acid in your body. Now, you don't have to have like toxins in your body to have acidity. So you can be deficient and have acidity. For example, if you're missing antioxidants, for example, you're missing things like glutathione, cysteine, selenium, CoQ10, lipoic acid, vitamin E. These are really important antioxidants that reduce acidity in the body or prevent the body from accumulating acid. And so if those things are missing, you're going to be depleted from them being deficient. So you want to make sure that you're having plenty of green leafy veggies and the foods that will, have those types of nutrients in them so that you're replenishing your body, of what it requires for your metabolism to run. So if you are a hot deficient, you want alkalinizing food. A raw vegan diet is very alkalinizing. And so that would be a really good temporary diet to cool the body down. So if you're too hot, the solution is to cool down. If you're deficient, the solution is to build up, to add back what's missing. So for a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type, you still want to eat small, frequent meals, 3 main meals, a couple of snacks, and then we go over all of this in detail in our Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program. And you can get a glimpse of it through our burnout assessment. We also give you some tips and tricks on how to apply your dynamic metabolic type to the 4 pillars of wellness there as well. So again, you want to do the opposite. So small, frequent meals so that you replenish what is deficient. And then you want to warm yourself up, right? So people with a cold dynamic metabolic type typically will have a body temperature that's a little bit below normal. So 98.6 is normal. So they might be 98, they might be 97. I've had some clients even take their temperature in the morning, it's like 96. That's not normal. That may be what you run, commonly, but it's not a normal body temperature. When things are too cold, they get sluggish, they don't move well. And so people with a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type are burnt out for two reasons. One, they're depleted in the things that they need for their metabolism to run, and they're too cold. And so that makes things sluggish, even more. And so those people are exhausted and burnt out for those reasons. So again, knowing that not only tells you why you're burnt out, but also how to resolve it. So now you know, okay, I'm too cold, I need to warm up. So how do you warm up with nutrition? How do you warm up through pillar number one, eat? So that means that you want to avoid raw, cold, and frozen food. So being a raw vegan under those circumstances would actually make you worse. So for people with a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type, we recommend that they have warm, well-cooked food. So soups, stews, broths, a little bit of spice, right? So throwing in a little bit of cayenne pepper, throwing in some black pepper, garlic, onion. If it's something on the sweeter side, cinnamon, ginger. These are all things that will warm you up. And also, for people that are cold, warmer forms of protein are also recommended. So for people who are not vegans or vegetarians, we do recommend, red meats. They are very warming. And that's where we get the term meat sweats, right? It makes you warmer. And so we do recommend that people have ground beef or, high quality steak. Again, we go over in great detail how to select the protein to make sure that it's well sourced. So make sure it's grass fed, grass finished, organic, super squeaky clean as much as we possibly can these days. So that's a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type. Now, if you're temperature neutral, I don't feel too hot, I don't feel too cold, none of those apply to me. I have a normal body temperature. You still want to have those small, frequent meals, right? But you don't have to pay as much attention to the temperature of the food, right? So you can have a little bit of raw food, a little bit of warm food. You kind of walk the middle. Where you're having some spice. If you like spicy food, great. It's not going to throw you off balance. You balance it with a little bit of raw food, salads, and things like that. And you just kind of stay in the middle. But the key there is small, frequent meals so that you are replenishing what is missing that is causing your metabolism to run too low. And so that's for the deficient dynamic metabolic type for pillar number one, which is eat. So now we're going to move on to the excess dynamic metabolic types. So we have, again, hot excess, cold excess, and temperature neutral excess. So with excess in general, again, what that means is there's stuff in the way. Toxins, inflammation, there's just stuff, gunking up the mechanism of your metabolism, making it sluggish. And that is the cause of your burnout and your fatigue, right? And so again, the dynamic metabolic type tells you why you're burnt out and how to reverse that, right? So now that you know that, okay, I have an excess dynamic metabolic type, I need to drain that stuff out of myself, right? I need to eat in a way that's going to be detoxifying or cleansing so that I can drain those toxins and those that inflammation out of my body, right? That's the goal with an excess. Now, how you do that in terms of, do I eat, well-cooked food? Do I eat raw food? What's going to benefit me the most? You want to know if you're a hot excess, a cold excess, or a temperature neutral excess, right? So if you're a hot excess, then yes, a raw vegan diet would actually be like the perfect diet. Now, again, these are all temporary until you reach your goal, right? And then you want to level your diet back out in a healthy way, which again, we go over in our course. But for the purposes of the podcast, we want to make sure that, if you're too hot, you are cooling down. You don't want to feel warm anymore. That's how you know that you're resolving the cause of your burnout. And you should also feel better, right? You should feel much more vibrant. You should feel much more energetic. You should be able to sit still and focus and not feel like you're going to fall asleep, right? Because you don't have that stuff, gunking up the mechanism of your metabolism anymore. So if you're a hot excess, it's a raw vegan diet or raw food, greens drinks, salads, those are really beneficial. Raw green leafy veggies, green tea, like all the things that are going to be alkaline and also draining, right? So now for an excess dynamic metabolic type, another really important thing to know is that you can fast. So the idea is to allow the body to drain itself of the toxins and the inflammation. So here, intermittent fasting is actually quite beneficial. Now, if you are a biological female, what I recommend is that you not fast during the early part of the day, but instead fast later in the day. So I call that reverse intermittent fasting. Um, you know, Biological males are, they're genetically different. We are genetically different, biological males and females. And so intermittent fasting impacts us differently for that reason, right? We menstruate. And so, there are times of the month where fasting might make us actually more fatigued and more tired. So if we fast earlier in the day, the problem with that is, again, we're robbing ourselves of the nutrition that we need when we're the most active. So for biological females, I do recommend that you eat at the earlier part of the day. So you start eating at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you stop eating at about 4, and then you fast the rest of the day until the following morning. That way you're feeding the most important time of day, and you're not overly draining yourself. Now, you can still do intermittent fasting the classic way. You just want to be super careful about it. Especially if you're a biological female, because it tends to be a little bit more draining for women than it is for men. But intermittent fasting overall, if you have an excess dynamic metabolic type, is actually quite beneficial. And so now, if you're a cold excess, what that means is, again, you still kind of want to drain the system. You want to, drain things out. So again, you can still do intermittent fasting. You can still do, like a vegan diet. But the difference here is because you're too cold, you want to warm yourself up. So you want everything to be warm, well cooked. You want to avoid raw, frozen, and cold things because you don't want to make yourself colder. You want them to be cooked. You want them to be in a broth, for example, or, in a stew, in a soup. So you can still do like a greens broth, and you're still kind of draining with lots of antioxidants and, getting the excess toxins and inflammation out of your body, but you're doing it in a way where you're neutralizing your temperature, so you're not going, off balance further and making yourself worse. So you always want to do the opposite. If you're too cold, you want to warm yourself up. And so that's the eat pillar for the cold excess dynamic metabolic type. And then for the temperature neutral, again, you kind of want to stay in the middle in terms of raw versus cooked and spicy versus bland. You're kind of walking, in the middle. But you still want to have a draining, emphasis on your diet. So again, intermittent fasting could be quite useful. Also, greens drinks, but again, here you can have some cooked, you can have some raw, you just kind of play with, whatever your favorite things are. So there's no like restriction per se for a temperature neutral in terms of whether you're having cooked or, cold or raw food. So that's the eat pillar, right? So again, you always want to think of, I need to do the opposite of what I am. I need to do the opposite of what has caused my burnout to get myself out of burnout. If I'm too deficient, I need to tonify or replenish what is missing. If I'm excess, I need to drain out the excess inflammation and toxins. If I'm too hot, I need to cool myself down with more alkaline foods, with perhaps more raw food. If I am too cold, I need to do the opposite of that. I need to warm myself up so everything is well cooked, a little bit spicy. If I'm temperature neutral, I don't have the temperature restrictions as much. So temperature neutrals are a little bit lucky in the way that they can, have a more broad diet. So again, the emphasis there for temperature neutral is, am I excess or am I deficient, right? And so that's pillar number one. All right, so pillar number two. move. And so this involves physical activities, movement, exercise. So again, the way that you move in order to get yourself out of burnout actually matters, right? So if you are in a deficient state, if you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type, whether you have a hot deficient, cold deficient, or temperature neutral deficient, the important thing to know about pillar number two is you want to be as restorative as possible. Being restorative means that you're stealing energy from the environment to bring it into yourself, and you're not giving very much away. And so things like yin yoga, for example, or Tai Chi or Qigong are restorative activities. They're considered to be moving meditations. So you're moving, there's still rhythmic motion going on, you're still in movement, but it's restorative. You're actually taking in more energy than you're giving away. And that's really important if you're deficient because you need to build your energy up, not give it away, right? And so whether you're hot, cold, or temperature neutral comes in terms of, let's say you're a hot deficient dynamic metabolic type, you don't want to do hot yoga, right? Because you're going to make yourself hotter, and that's actually going to drive you deeper into burnout. And so you want to be in a, neutral temperature location. So you want to avoid super hot environments, right? If you're a hot deficient dynamic metabolic type. Now, if you're a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type, hot yoga is amazing, right? It's the best thing you can do. Also, infrared saunas are great because the heat is coming into your body, so again, when you're too cold, you want to do the opposite to neutralize your body temperature, to neutralize your sensation of temperature or your intolerance to temperature. Now, if you're temperature neutral, it doesn't matter as much, right? That's not an issue as far as a cause of burnout for you. It's more that you're deficient. So whether you're doing hot yoga or, yin yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, as long as it's in a, reasonable location and you're not excessively exposing yourself to similar temperatures to the point where it's wearing you out, you're going to be fine, right? So that's for deficient dynamic metabolic type. The other really important thing to know about a deficient dynamic metabolic type for pillar number two, movement, is you want to avoid high intensity exercises. For example, high intensity interval training. You want to avoid, training for marathons, triathlons, for example, long distance running. These things are very draining. And if you are in a burnout state due to deficiency, and you do things that are too draining for yourself, you're going to actually make yourself worse. And so you want to avoid those types of activities, not forever, just until you can get yourself back, to a level metabolism, just until that dynamic metabolic type has been resolved and you're feeling much better. And even then, we coach our clients not to go and do too much. You want to kind of inch your way back into things as you're continuing to really take good care of yourself to keep, your metabolism optimized. And so now if you're an excessive dynamic metabolic type, right? So now you want to drain yourself out, right? So you want to do things that are a bit more aggressive in terms of your exercise. So you don't necessarily need to do things that are restorative like yin yoga, tai chi, qigong, but you want to do a little bit more on the order of high intensity interval training. You can do more aggressive things, sprints, tennis, playing soccer, basketball, things like that, things that you enjoy to do. Spin class is another thing that you can do. The emphasis there is you're moving the inflammation and the toxins so that they're mobilized and can leave your body. Now, when you combine that with the eat pillar, right? So you're eating for your dynamic metabolic type so that you have this overall kind of gentle cleanse effect going on with your diet. and you're moving a little bit more aggressively to mobilize the toxins, now it's easier to get rid of the inflammation and the toxins by doing a more aggressive type of physical activity. So this is great for people with excess dynamic metabolic type. Now, again, the temperature, whether you're a hot excess, cold excess, or temperature neutral excess, where that comes in is, again, the environment where you're doing the activity. So again, if you're a hot excess dynamic metabolic type, you kind of want to avoid hot yoga. You want to avoid like high temperature infrared saunas, for example. But if you have a cold dynamic metabolic type, for excess, then yes, being in a warmer climate, being in a warmer environment during your activities and your movements is great. You're going to feel much better because you're neutralizing that coldness. And you're smoothing out your metabolism in so doing. Now, again, temperature neutral, you don't have to be quite as, careful with the environments where you're doing your exercises. But again, you just want to have that overall kind of draining, aspect to your movement, a little bit of high intensity interval training, jogging, again, tennis, those types of things are going to be really good to mobilize those toxins. And then again, when you do that in conjunction with the eat pillar, this is how you get rid of that burnout. So now you've got two pillars going and firing on all cylinders, right? And then now that brings us to pillar number 3, which is rest. So resting is whether or not you take naps. Resting is how much sleep you get and also what time you go to sleep. And sleep is actually, in terms of survival, actually more important than food. But I'm still going to say the eating pillar is the most important because it also has to do with your sleep as well. But if we are too sleep deprived, that will kill us faster than bad food. So sleep is really important. So again, this depends on whether you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type or an excess dynamic metabolic type, more so than your temperature. So for example, as a deficient dynamic metabolic type, whether you're hot, cold, or temperature neutral, you need more sleep, right? So again, remember you're burnt out and exhausted because you're missing things. So the more that you rest, the less your body has to do and the more it can recover, the better off you're going to be. Now, in Chinese medicine, we learn that, again, your biological gender or sex has a lot to do with how much sleep you need. So for biological females, we need an additional hour of sleep than men do. So for men, it's 7 hours to maintain yourself. For women, it's 8 hours for maintenance. Now, if you're in a burnout state, you need to add an hour to that every night, consistently. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be perfect. And if you don't do that every single night, you're not going to get out of burnout. But you just want to have a level of consistency where more often than not, you're getting enough sleep, right? And that requires a little bit of planning. So again, for deficient dynamic metabolic types, if you are a biological female, we do recommend 9 hours of sleep consistently. And this may be required for several months. The idea that we can't catch up with sleep is a little bit of a myth. The reason that we think that is because we don't do what is necessary to catch up to the sleep, which is sleep more. So it's important if you're a biological female that you get those 9 hours consistently. If you're a biological male in a burnout state due to a deficient dynamic metabolic type, then 8 hours is recommended. Now, if you are an excess dynamic metabolic type, whether it's hot, cold, or temperature neutral, you don't need as much sleep, right? Because the emphasis is not to rest more because your issue is you have too much inflammation and toxins, right? So you just need the maintenance amount of sleep. So for example, a biological male who has an excess dynamic metabolic type, whether it's hot, cold, or temperature neutral, we recommend 7 hours of sleep per night. For a biological female of the same dynamic metabolic types, we recommend 8 hours of sleep. The reason that women need more sleep than men is due to menstruation, that we kind of drain ourselves out, so to speak, for several days out of the month, during our reproductive years. And unless we were very careful to kind of put back into the body what it was losing, we stay a little bit depleted. So biological females tend to be what's called blood deficient, according to traditional Chinese medicine. Not all biological females, but many are blood deficient. And what that means is things that are supposed to be circulating in our blood are missing. And the explanation for that is that we bleed that out of ourselves once a month for up to 7 days is considered to be, pretty normal. For 25% of the month, we're actively bleeding. Obviously, men don't have that. Biological males don't have that. And so they're not losing their reserves, once a month. So we have to kind of replenish those reserves on a consistent basis. And according to traditional Chinese medicine theory, we make blood while we sleep. So it's really important to get an appropriate amount of sleep. The other super important thing is not just how much sleep you get, but when you get it. That's really important. So the Chinese circadian clock, which we go over in our Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program, is very clear about the need to be more or less in bed around 10 and to sleep through until, the following morning, whether you need 7, 8, or 9 hours of sleep, depending on, your dynamic metabolic type and what's going on with your metabolism. And the hours of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. are super important because we make a very critical hormone during that time of night called melatonin. Melatonin is important in and of itself in that it helps us to fall asleep. But what's really critical about melatonin is that it gets converted to serotonin. And serotonin has its tentacles in every body function we can conceive of. So this is the reason that sleep deprivation causes diseases. And obviously sleep deprivation can cause burnout, which if left, unmanaged or unresolved, burnout can become diseases as well for the same reasons. And so sleeping at certain times is really important. Obviously, serotonin is extremely important for mood, but it's also extremely important for most of our body functions. So our metabolism relies on serotonin. And again, the eat pillar is important here because nutrients are used to make melatonin and subsequently to convert the melatonin into serotonin. So again, the eat pillar comes back here too in its importance. So this is why sleeping at certain times is extremely important. So sleep is the body's natural antidepressant. And if you have trouble sleeping, you definitely want to get that evaluated and treated. There are, lots of different options of natural agents that help you sleep. It's important to know why you're not sleeping well. Sometimes these can be due to gastrointestinal issues. Sometimes they can be due to just lifestyle factors, too much light exposure after sundown. Wearing blue light blockers might be beneficial for some people if you have a lot of screen time at night. So there could be various reasons. There can be sleep disorders, restless leg syndrome, sleep apnea, things like that. So if you're having trouble sleeping, definitely, get in touch with an integrative medical doctor, or at least see your primary care physician for a sleep study. If they don't find anything there that you find to be, helpful in resolving the sleep issue, then I encourage you to see an integrative medical doctor or Chinese medicine practitioner. But sleep is extremely important, and also resting. So people with a deficient dynamic metabolic type, we recommend to them that they take power naps in the middle of the day. So for 15 or 30 minutes, somewhere between 1 and 3 p.m., we ask people with a deficient dynamic metabolic type, again, temperature doesn't matter whether it's hot, cold, or temperature neutral. It's the fact that you're deficient. It's really important in the middle of the day to just go down for 10 or 15 minutes with your feet up, so that you're laying flat with your feet up. What that does is it brings back the blood from your extremities back to your core, back to your heart, back to your heart and lungs so that it can be reoxygenated and redistributed throughout your body. That's a very restorative and refreshing thing to do in the middle of the day. So again, if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, that's gold. And if you can do a breathing exercise while you're doing that, take some nice, deep, slow breaths through your nostrils, again, just for a few minutes, that's going to be an amazing way to get yourself out of burnout if you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type. If you have an excess dynamic metabolic type, hot, cold, or temperature neutral, it doesn't matter as much. You don't need the naps. But, obviously, if you want to take a nap, you can. But most people with an excess dynamic metabolic type will say, if I take a nap, I feel worse. I actually feel groggy. And I don't feel good when I wake up. And again, that's because there's just too much stuff in the way. So we don't really recommend naps to people with an excess dynamic metabolic type for that reason. And so that brings us to pillar number 4, which is detox. So again, pillar number 1 and 2 and 3 flow in to pillar number 4 because, obviously the food that we eat determines how effectively we remove toxins from the body. And how we move also determines how effectively we remove toxins from the body or inflammation. And then sleep. We actually detox while we sleep. So again, if we're not in bed on time, we tend not to detox our bodies and remove inflammation and toxins as efficiently. This is another beef I have with intermittent fasting is, again, we tend to eat later in the day when we fast. And that bogs down all of our detoxification mechanisms because it kind of hijacks the body into having to deal with digestion and absorption, when it's not the most efficient time for it to be digesting and absorbing, and B, when it's supposed to be prepping to detox. And so this is another reason I don't love intermittent fasting unless it's indicated. And even when it's indicated, I, again, prefer to reverse it. I prefer to have people eating, during the earlier parts of the day from, say, 8 a.m. until 4 p.m., and then you stop eating. That way, you have assimilated all your nutrients, you have run your metabolism very efficiently, and now it's ready to detox you. You're able to mobilize all the detoxification systems in your body, to be primed to remove those toxins and inflammation as you sleep. So detoxing for someone who is a deficient dynamic metabolic type, we do not recommend cleanses or formal detoxification systems for those clients because they will get worse doing that. So again, when you're deficient, even if you have toxins accumulating, the reason they're accumulating and the reason you have the inflammation is because things are missing that would naturally detox you. So when you force yourself to detox, what you're doing is you're actually lowering your metabolism further. You're making yourself even more depleted, and that's actually going to cause you to accumulate more inflammation and more toxins. So for those people, we ask them to rely on pillar number 1, 2, and 3 for detoxification. For people with an excess dynamic metabolic type, we guide them through a safe way to cleanse and detox their bodies so that, again, we're mobilizing and removing toxins from the system under those circumstances. So during our Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program, we train people on how to safely detox and cleanse if they have an excess dynamic metabolic type. It's important when you're cleansing and detoxing to know, like, for how long should I be doing this, right? And there are ways to gauge that are really critical so that you don't overdo it or underdo it, right? So, but this is just a quick taste into our 9-week transformation program that we have. It's a group coaching program that I started. We also have it for corporations, for corporate burnout prevention, and for individuals, within a group coaching philosophy. And so we guide you through 9 weeks of training so that you know from A to Z exactly how to figure out your dynamic metabolic type and exactly how to apply it to the 4 pillars of wellness on an ongoing basis with great detail. We also show you how to figure out when your dynamic metabolic type's been resolved, and then how to level out your activities, how to level out the four pillars so that you maintain your balance once you have gotten yourself out of burnout. And that's the key to burnout prevention. So I hope you found this episode to be helpful. And please visit our website, awakenwellnessnow.com. Take our burnout assessment if you haven't already. We have a free training where we show you again how to walk through figuring out your dynamic metabolic type. So I hope you got a lot of value out of this podcast. And I encourage you to visit our website, awakenwellnessnow.com, to learn more. And I hope to see you on the next podcast. Also, follow us on Instagram. You're welcome to join our newsletter by joining on our website as well. So you can be informed about our podcast episodes coming up. And until next time, I wish you many, many blessings. Thank you.